When you think of the most famous serial killers in history, who do you think of? Ted Bundy, Jack the Ripper, John Wayne Gacy? Throughout history, there have been hundreds of serial killers. Most get caught and are forgotten about, but some go on to leave a mark on the world, long after their killing spree. But some serial killers leave a mark on history because they were never caught or identified. The person I want to discuss is the infamous serial killer, the Zodiac Killer. Quick refresh on your Zodiac Killer lore. The Zodiac Killer was a pseudonym of an unidentified killer who murdered 5 known victims across the San Francisco Bay Area between the December of 1968 and October of 1969. What made this killer so famous were his signature ciphers and taunts that he'd send in letters to newspaper outlets. Something I've noticed is that this killer has the name the Zodiac Killer, as in singular. We're assuming that the series of murders were committed by a singular person, but I believe that the Zodiac Killer were the work of multiple people. Let's talk about patterns. A pattern is anything that repeats. Carpets, art, decorations, math, reading, science, literally everything, and that includes human nature, and by extension, serial killers. Whether it be because of method of killing, victim demographic, location, physical evidence, and eyewitness accounts, let's use the 2 serial killers I mentioned above, John Wayne Gacy and Ted Bundy. Let's start with Ted Bundy. This guy was a pretty sick individual. Stuff that I can't really describe here, but it's kind of pointless since serial killers aren't very school appropriate either. This guy was a rapist, necrophilist, and a mentally ill person with a childhood to match. He was pretty much set up for failure from the start, but luckily for the world, he was eventually caught and executed. But how? Well, if you've been paying attention to the general theme of this recording, you may have picked up on the not-so-subtle commentary that serial killers have patterns. How did the police identify and catch Ted Bundy? Bundy had a interesting method of killing, with the main victim demographic being young women. He'd pretend to be injured or disabled to gain sympathy. He would then lure them to a secluded area where he would inevitably kill the victim. Where things get really weird is that the victim's descriptions would be oddly specific. They tended to be young, white women with long, dark hair. This isn't necessarily a pattern that led the police to him, but it's just a smart thing to do. But when he would target women who were alone, they almost always occurred near colleges and operated in areas where he was personally familiar with, like near his home or places he used to live. This helped police close in on him originally. Physical descriptions were really helpful in this case. Usually I don't take eyewitness accounts seriously because they usually don't help. I'll get to why later, but in this case they did help catch Ted Bundy. The most common physical descriptions were long hair, broken nose, and some kind of injury that was fake. The most important time this was helpful when one of the would-be victims escaped and was able to give a very detailed physical description along with the car. It is important to note that later on police caught him because of his own lack of caution. John Wayne Gacy was another psycho murderer who committed horrific acts to 33 young men and boys. He would lead victims in the Norwood Park Township area to his house and proceed to very brutally violate, kill, and torture the people. With a very abusive father that terrorized him his entire childhood, Gacy most likely used his father as a reference for his torture methods. Police started noticing that a bunch of boys and men disappeared around Gacy's area, which reduced the area for the police to search. Neighbors started reporting suspicious behavior and a foul smell coming from his house. Police eventually got their hands on a search warrant and found bodies underneath the floorboards and buried in his backyard. After his confession to 33 murders, divers searched the river and found more people with the same strangulation by asphyxiation or garrote, which connected him to the murders. I mentioned earlier that I take eyewitness accounts with a grain of salt. The reason is because there are a ton of descriptions about this guy, but somehow we've never been able to identify anyone, or at least the people who have matched descriptions were found innocent. Now, there's a bunch of psychology of bias when it comes to certain situations, especially during a high adrenaline situation like witnessing a murder, or hardly paying attention and trying to recount details later on that makes eyewitness accounts very unreliable. These people might have seen other accounts and subconsciously stored that information, so when they are on the lookout, they are looking for these specific traits, and that can lead to repeating details. Now, all of this is necessary because it gives you an idea of why the Zodiac Killer was so interesting. If you look at the information about him, things don't match up. For one thing, his murders took place across a very wide area of space. There was no reason for him to do this. Bundy's kill spree occurred in several states, yes, but that was because he was on the run. Jack the Ripper, Jeffrey Dahmer, Harold Shipman, H.H. Holmes, heck, John Wayne Gacy. These are popular serial killers who attained a higher kill count than Mr. Zodiac here, and all of the victims were from around the area. It never occurred to them to spread their murders out in several different cities. The weapons use doesn't make sense. Once serial killers find a method that works, they're gonna keep doing it. It's not gonna cross their minds to use a different weapon. Going off of weapon use, the actual method of killing is very inconsistent. One was stabbed, several were shot, with 2 different guns even. This guy killed indiscriminately. Both men and women got killed. Some were alone, some were with someone else. Honestly, the only thing that connects all these murders together are the infamous letters that the Zodiac sent to the press. The inconsistent handwriting is one giveaway, but some of these letters were confirmed to be fake. What's stopping someone from sending a fake letter admitting to the murder? I do believe that some of these were sent by the real Zodiac, but comparing this guy to other serial killers shows a lack of inconsistency that we haven't seen in any singular killer. This points to the fact that these killings were not committed by a singular person, but a couple real murders by the Zodiac Killer, and possibly a couple imitators that threw the police off.